I wanted to ask you about your experience living in New York City. So, if I recall, you said that you were born in Harlem and then your family moved to East Elmhurst.
No, I was born at Mount Sinai Hospital on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, but
Okay.
the only house I've known has been a private house in East Elmhurst
Hmm.
that my parents purchased. I guess they purchased it somewhere in the first 3 months of my birth, which was 1959,
1959. Okay. And how long have you lived in East Elmhurst?
until 1985. Let's say 1985. No, 1980. Yeah, 1985. Yeah,
And then in 1985, you moved out? Did you rent a place or did you guys
we
purchase a
moved
place?
into a we moved actually in 1981. I moved into a rent. I rented a private apartment in a private
Hmm.
house. It was a basement apartment. I moved out of there late
Hmm.
1985. So I spent a
Yep.
little over 4 years there, and that was renting from a friend
Hmm.
in his own private house. That he It was a two-family house that he co-owned with someone, and so they rented me the basement as a basement apartment, fully furnished, uh, with all one bath, one bedroom, one bath, kitchen,
Hmm.
large living room, and I
Yeah.
stayed there until '85, and then we rented our first, together as a couple. Your mother and I
Yeah.
rented our first apartment, and that was under, I think, under the rent control status.
Yeah.
In other words, they
So,
couldn't raise the rent. They
yeah.
will offer you 1 or 2 year leases, and they could not raise the rent until those terms were up. So we had a series of 2 year lease
Hmm.
agreements. So that's when they would raise the rent
So
in
before
the
you
2 year
moved to
period.
the other apartment, how much rent did you pay for the basement apartment?
I would say 300 a month. It wasn't much at all. Wasn't much. It was more of a favor.
Yeah.
Um, like I said, my friend and mentor John Little
Yeah.
bought the house with another couple,
Yeah.
and so he knew that I wanted to move out from my house. It was
Hmm.
time. So
Hmm.
he and the other owner, who I knew, agreed to let me rent it.
Okay. Was that a lease or was that more of like a
That
handshake
was a verbal
agreement?
agreement. That was a handshake agreement, verbal and a handshake.
Okay. So moving, and that was in East Helmers, right? The basement apartment.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. And then from the basement apartment, 300 a month, you moved into rent stabilized apartment, and that was in Flushing.
Yes. That was a Flushing.
Okay.
And so the quality of living there, uh,
Yeah.
it wasn't like subsidized housing or the
Yeah.
projects.
Yeah.
It wasn't like it wasn't as good as co-op, because co-op you're investing in the building yourself. And so you always want to protect your investment. So it was the quality of living there was between a project and a co-op, and that could be a big gap depending on the tenants, how much they respected where they lived. So we were somewhere in the middle of the road. It was decent. We had decent maintenance. I'm going to use that word loosely. Um, the daily operations of the building was good. The upkeep was adequate. Um, the repair schedule, I'd say, was fair to good. Uh, it seemed like the level of care was on par with the level of living conditions. So if the people didn't care, The management and maintenance didn't care. Our buildings were owned by the building that we lived in was owned by Samuel Lefrak, and Samuel Lefrak was one of the proponents of the co-op, the giant co-op. So he had a standard. He had actually Co-op City. I think it's 18 buildings. Uh, he established that system. So that's his vision of New York renting. And so this was, we couldn't do co-op, but he could rent. So on a lesser scale, this was like his pet project or his second tier uh, operation. And so, like I said, it's always on par with the living. You know,
What was your rent? And was it a 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom? Or
it
studio?
was uh, it was a 1 bedroom, 1 bed, 1 bath, large living room with a kitchen and a dining area.
What were
Um,
the benefits of living in Flushing or living in that
proximity,
building? In that building.
proximity.
Okay.
Well, I had a friend that had moved into one of those apartments. See, Lefrak had a group of buildings. Once it was established that he can't do the co-op route, he got small apartments and would just rent them out. I had a friend that was there maybe 10, 15 years before I got there. It was my friend Garfield. His father had divorced his mother, and he moved out of their house in East Elmhurst, and he got an apartment there in Flushing. I don't know if it was exactly the building I was in, but all those buildings, all those surrounding buildings, all belong to Lefrak. He called it University Gardens. Each building was named after a college. So we lived in I think the Auburn, and it was the Colgate.
I don't remember it.
There was the Notre Dame.
Young.
Ingrid lived in the Notre Dame. You know, they just did that. They named them. You know, it was a little classy touch. But like I said, going back, I remember when Mr. Garfield was living there, and I went to visit Arthur over there. I thought it was very nice. There was a lot of little kids. It was a safe area. There was one main street that went past, and there wasn't a lot of traffic. They had a nice working pool. They had a nice park all to themselves. Everything, you know, it's like everything was put there for their use, and it was nice. I thought it was very nice. Now, fast forward 15 years later, we move in. Pool's not open. You know, they just neglected the pool over time. The park was still in order, but the proximity was the real selling point. It would have been nice if it had maintained that level of comfort, but you know, things fell off over time. But still, the proximity remained. We were near the major highways.
Mhm.
All the major shopping was minutes away. Subway was a decent walk, 15
Is it
minute
10 minute,
walk.
10, 15 minute?
15, I say 15.
Okay.
You know, you walk up to Casino Boulevard and like 6 long blocks, and it
Yeah.
was there. Or you could take the bus. And public transportation was in all directions.
Yeah.
And then for recreation, you had Queens Botanical Park right there.
Hmm.
You had Flushing Meadow Park, which was a short walk through Botanical Gardens.
There was another story about the maintenance guy, and this must have been in 1991. There was an issue with the maintenance guy that um, mom was locked out of the apartment, and she tried to find a maintenance guy, but she couldn't find him. That he had a drinking problem, or he just wasn't responsive, or something.
Both,
Okay.
both. He had been there quite a while, and like most, not most, like a lot of New York workers, once you spend a certain amount of time on a job, you get so complacent
Yeah.
that you think that well, first of all, you think it can't run without you, and then you
Hmm.
think that you could do this in your sleep. Everything, oh, I got it. Everything's automatic. He did have a drinking problem, and he had let's call it a roving eye,
Mm.
and so he took up with one of the or maybe a few of the tenants, and that compromised
Yeah.
his work skills or his work.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, he was on the day that your mom had to call on him. Came home. She went to pick you up from next door, and you walked in the apartment. And one of the features of the apartment that I did not like
Yeah.
was the spring-loaded door.
Yeah.
Expensive apartments don't have that,
Hmm.
right? The more you go down the scale, the more you'll see stuff like that. That's one feature that I didn't like.
Yeah.
And the door closed.
So I want to switch gears a little bit. I've been having a lot of conversations with a lot of, they call them transplants. So as you know, historically, New York City has been, especially since I would say the 70s, um, a place where immigrant populations go, Black and brown folks go, artists really flock to. But now there seems to be a shift about who's able to move into the city in a lot of spaces, right? When we think about gentrification, and so these transplants, folks
Hmm.
from, Ohio and Wyoming moving en masse, I start to tell them a little bit about the history of behind New York. And so I tell them about Bronx is burning. Can you tell me a little bit about what you know about that phenomenon or that
Yeah. Well, first of
historical?
all, the Bronx apartments weren't run by companies. You had your um, projects. That's one entity. We'll just move that out of the way. That was a significant number of people. That's one thing. Then you had your uh, the condo system wasn't in the Bronx really. It was the co-op, the cooperative, but they picked and chose which areas they were going to do it. Of course, you had Co-op City, and you had smaller co-ops spread around, but in different areas like Pelham Parkway, along Pelham Parkway. You had some on the Grand Concourse. These were older buildings that got converted into the co-op system, but for the most part, they were privately owned, and that's where the term slumlord came from, because they would do as little as they could, just enough to make it livable, but they needed their rent. Give me my rent. And so they would do less than honest things. For instance, they would instead of scraping paint and starting from the original surface, they would just simply paint over it. They would use two colors. We used to call it tenement tan or battleship gray. Sort of like what the projects do. See, the projects do it because the government says, here's your paint. This is the color we authorize. Boom. Well, the slumlords would do the same thing. Uh, Once people couldn't afford the rents, they knew that they could make more money off insurance than from actual renting. And they didn't really care about the people; they cared about getting that money. So they would burn them out. They got away with it. Get the insurance claim and move on. And if someone else would, if it was in, if it was salvageable, someone else would come along and buy it, throw a few $1,000s in it, and then start renting it out again. But they weren't up to standard. the living standard. They were rat infested, roaches everywhere, and they really didn't care. There was a time where you could stand on one block and look 3 blocks ahead, just through all the rubble. It's like it was bombed out because there was so many of them that just didn't care. They let them run down.
Have you
know.
known anyone that lived in any of those apartments that got pushed out?
I can't say that I do, but
Okay.
I've seen a lot of them. I probably, if I'd ask people,
Yeah.
that's one thing people that talk about too much. They'll tell you what street they lived on or what section of the Bronx they lived in.
Yeah.
But um, you could probably, I probably came across 20, 30, 40 people that lived in those
Mhm.
situations. I know that your grandfather had customers from his auto shop that lived. We're just
Mhm.
going to use the Hunts Point area for instance.
Yeah.
They had a bunch of tenements, but the people that lived there for years. They raised their children there,
Yeah.
and so they had a moral investment in the quality of living.
Hmm.
Even though they were paying rent to somebody that really didn't care about them, they made sure that the building was decent and upkept. Um, they were inhabited by a lot of Jewish people up until, let's say, the mid 60s, early 70s, and they started moving out. Some of them held out and stayed, but for the most part, they all moved out because that was basically an area where Jews had a lot of um, things for themselves, like goods and services that they could rely on. And then they slowly started leaving that area. The buildings remain. And these are big buildings. These are pre-war structures, a lot like Jackson Heights, which was basically going through the same thing. But the Bronx, just the deterioration happened so rapidly. It was crazy.
And
And
then in 1993, you moved to you moved from
Melrose.
renting to owning.
Yep.
So just for some context, can you, from what you've seen living in Queens, can you tell me a little bit about, particularly with the home buying process, what is redlining and how did it affect you trying to buy a home?
Redlining is the collusion between the banks to decide what areas were high risk or low risk. And most of the time it was based on color. That was one factor. The other thing, like almost coincidentally, is the school districts. It just seemed like the school district was on the other side of that red line. And the good school districts happen to be bordered by the same lines, but in there, on the side that you can get loans and they'll release give you mortgages. They'll give you fair. If they gave you a mortgage, it'll be a fair rate. Uh, Resale was good. Um, Equity in the home rose at a decent level, and it was looked at as a positive thing for beginning of generational wealth. Uh, it's just funny how someone just came, took a map and said everything on this side of the line is no good. Everything on that side we'll consider. No matter what your credentials, no matter what your background, no matter what uh your finances look, you were just deemed to be risky because you was on that side of the line. Another line, coincidentally, that was created in the late 50s, actually in the early 60s, leading into the 70s, was the development of the interstate. And the interstate was another line that could be drawn. And you could see how some neighborhoods were on the I'm going to use the phrase unflattering side of the road. It used to be railroad tracks in the mid century. Thus the term, you come from the other side of the tracks. You know, um, those were the three main things. The congressional and Senate lines drawn. That's from them doing their homework about how many people live just inside the line or just outside the line. And then they drew the lines to include or exclude certain people. If one party needed more votes, but they knew that most of the people was on the other side of the line, they moved the line over to include them. And then some of them would include the opposition party, knowing that it won't affect their mass numbers, but it would weaken the other side of the line. So they would redraw lines that way as well. So
That's happening in Texas. There's so
yeah,
many folks showing that Texas is actually blue now, but because of gerrymandering and the changing of the party line and the drawing from who gets counted where, it actually effectively weakens
yeah,
any
that's
blue votes and strengthens red
exactly,
votes, even though they're technically
exactly,
the minority.
exactly. You add blue votes to a red area, knowing that the red area is overwhelmingly
Mhm.
red,
Yeah.
and so the adding blue won't hurt it, but it will affect the other side.
So
So
how did that impact you when you were looking for a home? I remember distinctly you guys telling me about stories of folks taking properties off of the market to avoid selling to you and mom, and then
well,
the real
uh,
estate agent pushing one area over a different area.
right. Well, before we got to that phase,
Hmm.
we looked on our own. And that was part of our learning process. I learned
Yeah.
about the attached houses.
Hmm.
I learned about corner houses. We were doing all that on our own. And then we had friends who knew someone that was selling. And, so these were recommendations. And one recommendation was from a cop who was leaving New York.
Hmm.
So his house was maintained well. He lived in I guess, a mostly white area. Um, House was nice. It was kind of small, but it was well kept, and it was remote. In other words, it was on the wrong side of the belt park. I should say the wrong side of the belt walkway. It was on one side of a part of a highway,
Hmm.
which made it isolated.
Hmm.
Now that could be good because you don't have riffraff and crime coming into your area because you're separated,
Right.
right, by 6 lanes. That was the good part. Bad part was that it was close to the airport.
Hmm.
And so you had the airport noise.
Yeah.
So we didn't take it,
Sorry,
but
just for context, the airport you're referring to is JFK.
JFK, JFK, yeah. We didn't take it because it was early in the process and we felt we could get something else better
Hmm.
with more pluses. So we kept looking. Uh, Another recommendation, which I liked, was Westbury. This- And we went there, and the pluses was it was a big enough house, I think 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, maybe 2.5 baths, but it was a split ranch, which I liked at the time. The negatives, it had an unfinished basement. So that would have been my project. I was young enough and had enough energy that I could have done most of that work. I knew enough people that could help me, but it was a project. Um, you're supposed to have, what's that, 82-inch ceiling height to be good. It was, I'd say, 60 inches, which meant I needed 2 feet of excavation to make it a legal or a livable area. That's one negative. The other negative is the taxes. Westbury taxes was 2.5 to 5 times more than New York City. So to get a mortgage, the way they structured it, the taxes would be incorporated into the mortgage. It would significantly raise our monthly payments. But we never got to the finances. We just knew that it was $5, $6, $7,000 taxes compared to roughly $1,000 in the city. So that was the other thing. The third factor was that we knew these people, but we didn't know these people. Okay, they were a friend of your grandfather's new wife, and we didn't know. There's a lot of hesitancy dealing with that area, so we didn't go there. We kept looking. Then we decided to call on a mortgage broker, and what we learned is, number one, they're just as dishonest as the next salesman, and um, they didn't have our best interests at heart. And we found out financially we didn't need them. What the deciding factor was that I tried to get the man to tell me that, and he would not say it. He would not say, "This is you. We're not the entity that you need." We have a market. Our market is people whose credit is bad and who are almost desperate. That's our market. You don't need us. He wouldn't tell me that. So that gave me my answer. Then we started refining our search, and we went to a realtor in the area that we wanted, which was Belrose, uh, uh, Queens Village, that general area, Eastern Queens or Southeastern Queens. We definitely didn't want to go below Hempstead Turnpike, but we saw a house in Rosedale that was very appealing, very large. It was a large house, maybe 5 bedrooms. It had a walk around yard, so it had a double sized lot, had a garage, had a long driveway that could probably hold, I don't know, 5 or 6 cars. Um, but and the price was decent. But Belrose has drainage problems as a whole. But uh, we this particular house wasn't in the wet area. But just for example, to get home, we would have to go through the water to reach us. But our home wasn't threatened by water because I did an inspection and I saw that there was no water damage. There's no water damage on the concrete surrounding it, on the 2 houses next to it. You didn't see watermarks. So, and you didn't see cracked sidewalks. All that's evidence of damage. And these are the things that the realtor wasn't telling us, things to look for. I just learned these things as we went. As we went through the process, I just kept picking up information about certain things. One thing I did is before we started our search, I researched building types, which taught me that the best structure in New York City is the brownstone. Uh, there are no capes in Manhattan. There are some capes in the Bronx, but those are the good sections. There's capes in Eastern Queens, like Belrose, Queens Village, you notice a lot of capes there. As you get closer to Long Island and cross over into Long Island, the Cape is very popular. Um, Brownstones in areas of congestion, but there's a very well built structure. Um, and then everything else in between was what do you call them? Frame houses, uh, colonials, which is a vague term, but they use colonials. Everything was colonials. A grade above it would be the Victorian, but I did my homework, so I knew that I grew up in a regular frame colonial, like your mother, but your mother's house was bigger. So I knew and was accustomed to that. So that's how I refined my search. I'm going to look for a colonial. I didn't know much about a cape. I'm still learning. But if a cape came along with a good price, I might have jumped on it. And one did, but it was in Nassau County, so triple the taxes, and it was next to a railroad, which is death waiting to happen if you're not careful. And I don't just mean somebody drifting into the train.
Yeah.
A derailment
Yeah.
can wipe out a neighborhood.
Yeah.
You know.
Before we wrap up, I just want to get your thoughts. After you guys found your place, and for context, you and mom worked for the city of New York for 3 decades each, so combined about 6 decades.
Right.
What is something that you have noticed about the impact of gentrification?
I know that early in my career, I worked only in Queens, and as I got comfortable, I ventured out, and there were times where I worked in Brooklyn, and Brooklyn's reputation is what stopped me from going there earlier. And I would have been right. Brooklyn was watch your back, watch your back. It was
Well,
one.
it was
It was
bedside. It
literally
was bedside, do or die, right?
Bed-Stuy, Red Hook,
Crown Heights.
uh, Crown Heights. But remember, Crown Heights is divided. It's two
Yes.
sides to Crown Heights.
Yes.
So it wasn't. It could be as bad as you think, but it wasn't as bad as you think.
Yeah.
Crown Heights culturally was very diverse, and so
Yeah.
it canceled itself out. So
Gotcha.
I wouldn't even look at that.
Mm.
Um, Bed-Stuy, um,
Bushwick or East Williamsburg. I say
not
that.
Williamsburg. Williamsburg was, I think, one of the first to gentrify.
Yeah.
It was inhabited by a lot of Hasidim, and they came in and put the money into it. I guess they decided this is going to be our little thing. And remember, that was because they came over the Williamsburg Bridge, so that's how that connection came about from the Lower East Side, just above Alphabet City, just below Alphabet City. Was a large Jewish population, and it simply went over the Williamsburg Bridge right into that area very conveniently. Now I was thinking about Brownsville in East New York. They were bad. And remember, they all have projects. And so that's where a lot of your crime and stuff came from. But aside from the projects, they did have houses. And so when the opportunities came, these places were bought up. And basically, they bought everything from around the projects. And so now you've isolated the projects to just be here, and everybody else around it is living well. Red Hook and Fort Greene are two good examples. But no, I saw it slowly, and I saw it with Harlem, but it just seemed like in the course of maybe 4 summers, 'cause it seemed like over the summers when you saw the transition, you know. And then I heard stories. I have friends that own uh, brownstones in Harlem who were offered cash to sell, and the cash looked good, but it left one big question: you take that money, where are you going? You know, and that was never answered by the guy holding the suitcase that showed up. You know, even your cousin in Far Rockaway, same thing. Uh, just for example, the Rockaways was intended to be a vacation spot for rich New Yorkers. They have their beach houses, their cabanas right there along on the beach. But then the law said you can't isolate people. You can't isolate areas just for one group. It has to be open to everybody. And so that's how that came about. Uh, I'll tell you one thing you did. I don't know if you know about. It's called. It was a program in the late '60s. So I was too young to deal with it, but I heard a lot of the adults talking about it. It's called Mitchell Lama. Or you looked into it? Yeah, that was a nice thing for the co-op system because that's the way that they wanted to go. They wanted to have cooperatives where people were buying shares, and then the condo came up afterwards. So I like condos because you have equity. Uh, Co-op, you do not. You just own your shares. Now the shares may go up or they may go down.